High above Europe, in the summer of 1943, the sound of thunder did not come from storms. It came from engines, four at a time, on hundreds of aircraft, droning through thin, frozen air. Below them lay the heart of Hitler's war machine, the factories, railways, and fuel depots that powered the Third Reich. And cutting across the clouds came the unmistakable silhouettes of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. At first, German officers had laughed at the name. They mocked its bulk, its speed, its American optimism. To them, the idea that such a heavy machine could survive over Germany's skies was absurd. But as wave after wave of silver bombers began appearing over cities like Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the laughter faded. When the first bombs struck with unnerving precision, when convoys of oil and ammunition erupted into fire, and when the smoke from burning factories rose higher than the clouds themselves, the mockery turned to fear. This is the story of the Flying Fortress, how it was born, why it was doubted, and how it changed the course of the air war over Europe. The Boeing B-17 did not begin as a legend. In the early 1930s, the U.S. Army Air Corps called for a new long-range bomber, something capable of defending America's vast coastlines. At the time, aviation was still young. Most military aircraft were fragile, lightly armed, and short-ranged. At Boeing's factory in Seattle, engineers imagined something different, a bomber that could fly high, far, and fight back. Their prototype, the Model 299, first took to the skies in 1935, when a reporter saw its bristling array of machine gun turrets, one in the nose, one in the tail, two on top, and more in the sides. He wrote that it looked like a flying fortress. The name stuck, and soon it became the heart of Boeing's design philosophy. Build it tough, make it self-defending, and give it wings strong enough to carry war deep into enemy territory. The B-17's design was revolutionary for its time. It used an all-metal monocoque fuselage, powerful Wright Cyclone engines, and could fly above 25,000 feet, higher than most contemporary fighters. Its defensive armament was unmatched, up to 13 50-caliber machine guns, covering almost every approach angle. But perhaps its most famous feature was its durability. Crews told stories of B-17s limping home with half their tail missing, riddled with holes, yet still landing safely. Each tale added to the myth that the fortress was indestructible. When the United States entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, the B-17 was ready. Not perfect, but proven. By 1942, formations of flying fortresses were heading to Britain, where they would join the 8th Air Force in a bold new experiment: daylight precision bombing. Europe, by 1943, was a continent under siege. The German Luftwaffe had swept through Poland, France, and much of the Soviet Union. But now, the skies above the Reich were becoming the next great battlefield. The Allies had two competing ideas of air warfare. The British Royal Air Force, hardened by years of night raids, believed in area bombing, striking entire cities at night, hoping to break German morale and industry alike. The Americans, however, had a different faith: the idea of daylight precision bombing. With advanced Norden bomb sights and disciplined formation flying, they believed they could hit factories, ball-bearing plants, and rail yards directly, crippling Germany's ability to fight without the need for mass destruction of civilians. It was a noble ideal, and a risky one. Daylight missions meant visibility, and visibility meant vulnerability. In 1942 and early 1943, American bombers began testing this theory. They struck at targets in occupied France, the Netherlands, and along the western German border. At first, the results seemed encouraging, but as the bombers pushed deeper into Germany, the Luftwaffe's defenses grew fierce. German radars spotted incoming formations long before they reached their targets. Hundreds of fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, scrambled to intercept them. From the ground, flak batteries filled the sky with black puffs of shrapnel. It was a deadly combination. For every successful bombing run, the Americans paid in fire and metal. Crewmen watched fellow fortresses spiral downward, engines aflame, parachutes blossoming against the sky. Still they pressed on, believing in the strategy and in the machine that carried them. The B-17's toughness became both a comfort and a curse. It could survive incredible punishment, yes, but that meant it was sent again and again, deeper into the heart of the Reich. By mid-1943, the war planners in Washington and London decided it was time to test their faith in the flying fortress to its limit. In Germany, the response was confident, even dismissive. Luftwaffe intelligence had studied the B-17 closely. Reports described it as a flying barn, too slow to outrun fighters, too large to maneuver, and too heavily loaded to climb quickly. In officers' mess halls from Berlin to Stuttgart, jokes about American arrogance circulated freely. To the Luftwaffe, the Americans were naive. Newcomers who believed technology and optimism could replace combat experience. The German fighter arm, forged in years of relentless warfare, saw itself as unmatched. Many German commanders openly ridiculed the idea of unescorted bombers flying deep into the Reich. Without fighters of their own, the Americans seemed to be offering easy targets. When the first large-scale raids approached in mid-1943, some officers even looked forward to it, as a chance to prove the invincibility of their air defenses. But not everyone was laughing. A few veterans of the Battle of Britain understood the danger. They had seen how industrial power and persistence could grind down even the strongest air force. If the Americans could maintain this pace, if their factories could keep producing more bombers and more crews, then numbers alone might shift the balance. The first serious test came in the summer of 1943. The combined raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, two of the most vital industrial cities in Germany. Schweinfurt produced ball bearings, essential for every tank, aircraft, and engine in the Reich. Regensburg built aircraft themselves, the heart of the Luftwaffe's own production. The Americans planned a daring strike, a coordinated two-part mission, hundreds of bombers deep into enemy territory, all in broad daylight. It would be the largest test yet of the flying fortress, and the last time German officers would laugh at it. By August 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force was ready to prove its theory of daylight precision bombing once and for all. The target, two cities deep inside Germany's industrial core, Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Schweinfurt was the heart of German ball-bearing production. Every tank tread, aircraft propeller, and machine tool in the Reich depended on those bearings. Regensburg, further south, built the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the very fighter that guarded the German skies. If both targets could be struck on the same day, the damage would ripple through Germany's war machine. But the plan was perilous. No long-range escorts could accompany the bombers the entire distance. The P-47 Thunderbolt could only reach partway before turning back. The mission, therefore, relied on timing. The first wave, the 4th Bomb Wing, would hit Regensburg, then continue south across the Alps to bases in North Africa. Hours later, the second wave, the 1st Bomb Wing, would strike Schweinfurt and return to England. In theory, the staggered assaults would stretch German defenses, forcing the Luftwaffe to split its response. But as with so many operations in war, theory soon collided with chaos. At dawn on August 17, 1943, engines roared to life across English airfields. Hundreds of crews suited up. Heavy leather jackets, oxygen masks, and the quiet ritual of last-minute letters slipped into pockets. Ground crews checked ammunition belts and fuel lines, while chaplains offered short prayers amid the thunder of engines. The Regensburg group lifted off first, 146 B-17s climbing in tight formation. For a brief moment, the sun caught their silver wings, reflecting across the English countryside like a flock of mirrors. But fog delayed the Schweinfurt group on the ground. Minutes stretched into an hour. and that delay would prove disastrous. Over the North Sea, German radar operators watched the incoming armada. Within minutes, alerts rang out across western Germany. From bases near Frankfurt, Würzburg, and Munich, squadrons of Bf-109s and Fw-190s scrambled to intercept. The Regensburg formation was first to feel their fury. The air battle over southern Germany that morning was one of the fiercest of the war. Fighter after fighter slashed through the formations, firing cannon shells and machine gun bursts into the lumbering bombers. The fortresses responded with steady streams of .50 caliber fire, tracers streaking across the blue sky. The air became a lethal web of smoke and shrapnel. Pilots shouted over intercoms as engines caught fire, wings tore apart, and bomb bays opened on cue. Below, the city of Regensburg shimmered in haze, its Messerschmitt factory sprawling along the Danube. At precisely 11 a.m., the first bombs fell. The precision was astonishing for its day. Assembly halls erupted, aircraft fuselages burned, workers fled through clouds of dust. Nearly half the facility was destroyed. But the cost was terrible. As the surviving B-17s turned south toward Africa, many carried wounded crewmen, others limped on 3 engines, and some disappeared entirely into the clouds. Of the 146 bombers that left England, only 122 reached North Africa. More than 20 were lost en route, and the Schweinfurt force had yet to face its ordeal. Hours after the Regensburg strike, the second formation finally crossed the Channel. The delay meant the Luftwaffe, instead of being divided, had time to refuel, rearm, and prepare. They waited. Over Belgium, the first German fighters appeared, darting in pairs, diving from above, hammering the bombers head-on. For 5 relentless hours, the battle raged from the Rhine to Schweinfurt. Crews watched fortresses explode mid-air, wings shearing off, parachutes tumbling through the haze. Each squadron lost friends, and still the order came: hold formation, stay tight, keep the line. When they finally reached Schweinfurt, the city below was already blackened by smoke from flak bursts. Yet the crews stayed steady. Bomb bay doors opened, and streams of bombs fell true. The Kugelfischer and SKF factories, Germany's vital bearing plants, were struck repeatedly. By the time the last bomber turned for home, Schweinfurt was burning. The mission had achieved its objective, but at an almost unbearable price. When the survivors landed back in England, the airfields were filled with wrecks limping in. Some fortresses landed with engines missing. Others touched down on punctured tires or half-destroyed wings. 60 bombers were lost that day, nearly 1 in 5. Hundreds of airmen were killed or captured. At first, commanders declared the mission a success. The damage to Regensburg and Schweinfurt was immense. But analysts soon realized the truth. Germany rebuilt quickly, and the loss rate was unsustainable. If such missions continued without long-range fighter escort, the 8th Air Force could bleed itself dry. Yet the psychological impact was undeniable. For the first time, the Germans had seen American bombers strike deep into the Reich. Not a few daring sorties, but a massive, coordinated assault. Civilians watched the sky in disbelief as hundreds of bombers passed overhead, unshaken by flak, unwavering in formation. The laughter was gone. In Luftwaffe command centers, the reports were both triumphant and troubling. Yes, many bombers had been destroyed, but the attacks themselves had reached targets once thought untouchable. And there was a deeper problem. For every fortress shot down, American factories produced 2 more. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, was furious. He had once boasted that no enemy aircraft would ever penetrate the skies of the Reich. Now, he could no longer guarantee it. Luftwaffe pilots, exhausted and short on fuel, began to feel the strain. Each mission against the fortresses was costly. The bomber gunners were deadly accurate, and their formation flying meant mutual protection. To attack, German pilots had to break through walls of machine gun fire, often losing comrades before even reaching range. One German ace later recalled, "We dived into them like hawks, but they were flying fortresses indeed. You could pour fire into one and it still kept coming." Slowly the realization set in. These bombers were not easy prey. They were instruments of industrial warfare, built not just to destroy, but to endure. While generals studied maps, the men inside the fortresses lived the war minute by minute. Each mission was a test of endurance, courage, and teamwork. A standard crew of 10, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and 5 gunners, relied on each other completely. The cockpit temperature at altitude often dropped below -40 degrees. Oxygen masks froze. Gun barrels jammed from the cold. Enemy fighters struck from every direction, above, below, head-on, and from the tail. Inside the cramped fuselage, communication was constant. Short, clipped words through the intercom. "Bandits 10 o'clock. Check your 6. Bombs away." They flew for hours, knowing that at any moment a shell could end it all. Among these crews, bravery became routine. Stories spread of B-17s returning with entire sections of fuselage missing, with wounded pilots kept alive by co-pilots hand-flying crippled aircraft all the way home. One bomber, nicknamed Ye Old Pub, returned to England after a mission so badly damaged that another pilot, a German ace named Franz Stiegler, refused to shoot it down, escorting it out of German airspace instead. Such moments revealed a strange fraternity amid the horror, a recognition of shared humanity above the flames. By late 1943, the B-17 had earned its reputation. It was no longer just an aircraft. It was a symbol of endurance, of faith in technology, and of the American belief that precision could bring victory. Yet even legends have limits. Losses remained high, and deep strike missions were suspended until a solution could be found. That solution would soon arrive, carried on the sleek wings of a new kind of escort fighter, the P-51 Mustang. Winter, 1943. In the cold skies over Europe, the air war hung in a dangerous balance. American daylight bombing had proven devastating, but also costly. Without escort fighters that could accompany them all the way to the target and back, the flying fortresses were forced to rely on courage alone. Losses mounted. Entire groups sometimes failed to return. It seemed that, despite their toughness, the B-17s might never be enough to win control of the air. Then came a new silhouette. Sleek, slender, and unmistakably fast. The North American P-51 Mustang. Originally designed for the British, the Mustang's potential was unlocked when engineers fitted it with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Suddenly the aircraft could climb higher, fly faster, and, crucially, travel farther than any other Allied fighter. With external fuel tanks, the Mustang could escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For the first time, the flying fortress would not fly alone. The impact was immediate. Beginning in early 1944, squadrons of P-51s began sweeping ahead of the bomber formations, clearing the skies of German interceptors. When the Luftwaffe rose to meet the B-17s, they found Mustangs waiting for them. American fighter pilots were aggressive and fearless. Their orders were simple: engage the enemy wherever they found him. No longer were the Germans able to mass large groups of fighters against the bombers. Instead, they faced a constant, unpredictable threat from above, behind, and out of the sun. The results were devastating. Within months, the Luftwaffe's veteran aces began to fall, replaced by inexperienced pilots with little training and almost no fuel for practice. German airfields themselves became targets, strafed by P-51s as soon as the bombers had passed overhead. Hermann Göring reportedly said after the first Mustang-escorted raids, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." The air over Germany was no longer a sanctuary. It was becoming a battlefield the Allies dominated. With their new escorts, the flying fortresses resumed deep strike missions across the Reich. Now they could attack not only factories, but also oil refineries, transportation hubs, and the synthetic fuel plants that kept the German war machine alive. Each month, the bombing campaign grew more intense. Rail lines twisted into wreckage. Convoys carrying fuel and ammunition erupted into rolling firestorms along the roads. Entire cities like Hamburg, Cologne, and later Dresden would suffer catastrophic attacks, some by British night raids, others by American daylight precision bombing. The fortress formations became symbols of inevitability. German civilians learned to recognize the distant drone, the sound that meant another city, another industry, another piece of the Reich's strength would soon be reduced to smoke. By mid-1944, the once proud Luftwaffe fighter force was broken. The surviving pilots fought bravely but hopelessly against overwhelming numbers. The Americans had not only won the technological race, they had outproduced and outlasted their opponent. The skies that once mocked the idea of the flying fortress now belonged to it. But victory from the air came at a terrible price. Between 1942 and 1945, more than 47,000 airmen of the 8th Air Force were killed in action, a casualty rate higher than that of the U.S. Marine Corps in the Pacific. Every mission was a gamble with death. Crews called the airfields of East Anglia fields of ghosts. Each day, some planes returned full of holes, some half-burned, and some never came back at all. For the men who survived, the memories lingered. The roar of engines, the freezing cold, the smell of cordite and fear. They had lived through one of the most dangerous duties of the war, and in doing so, helped open the path for D-Day and the final defeat of Nazi Germany. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was exhausted. Fuel shortages crippled training. Young pilots were sent into combat with barely 20 hours of flight time. Many died before firing a single shot. Meanwhile, Allied bombers flew almost unopposed. They struck refineries in Ploiești, marshalling yards in Vienna, and aircraft factories near Munich. Germany's ability to sustain the war was collapsing. Even the famed Me-262 jet fighter, a revolutionary design that might have changed the balance, arrived too late, in too few numbers, and with too little fuel. For every jet that took off, dozens of Mustangs waited to pounce. The Reich's once invincible air defense network was disintegrating. By early 1945, the skies belonged entirely to the Allies. The flying fortress, once derided as too slow, too heavy, too American, had become a symbol of unstoppable power. When the war ended in 1945, more than 12,700 B-17 flying fortresses had been built. They had flown over 300,000 missions and dropped nearly 640,000 tons of bombs on Axis targets. For the men who flew them, the aircraft became a part of their identity, both a weapon and a home. They remembered the creaks of the fuselage under pressure, the vibration of 4 engines working in perfect rhythm, and the strange silence that followed when the bombs were released. The B-17 had proven not only its toughness, but the strength of the idea it represented. That technology, courage, and relentless persistence could turn the tide of war. It was an idea the Germans had underestimated, and one that reshaped the 20th century. After the war, surviving fortresses were scrapped, sold, or repurposed. A few became test aircraft or transport planes. Others fell silent in museums. Yet their legend endured, in history books, in veterans' stories, and in the collective memory of a generation that had seen the world set on fire from above. In 1943, the Luftwaffe officers who mocked the flying fortress could not imagine what was coming. They saw a slow, heavy bomber, not a revolution in warfare. They believed courage alone would shield Germany from the sky. But when hundreds of fortresses filled the horizon, when the bombs fell with precision that no one had thought possible, when convoys and factories burned for days, the laughter stopped. From the smoke of Schweinfurt to the ruins of Berlin, The lesson was written in fire and steel. Underestimate your enemy, and the sky itself may turn against you. The B-17 Flying Fortress was more than an airplane. It was the embodiment of a nation's industrial might, its faith in technology, and its unbreakable will to fight back. And though its engines have long fallen silent, the sound of those four propellers still echoes across history. A reminder of the moment when disbelief turned to fear, and mockery turned to awe. German officers laughed at the Flying Fortress, until it turned their convoys into firestorms.